So Nigel Roby is the chief executive of the Bookseller.
Yeah.
And what does that mean that you're the chief executive?
Well, I'm actually owner and chief executive and publisher. So I'm overall in charge of everything that we do, and everything that we do, the Bookseller now is the weekly magazine, it's the website, we have 3 conferences, we run the YA Book Prize, Young Adult Book Prize, and we run the British Book Awards. So I'm in overall charge of those, although of course, that's quite a lot. So we have about 24 of us here doing those things, with Philip Jones as the editor and Emma Lowe as director of publisher relations, but a very experienced team across the board.
Yeah. And did you buy it from someone? You must have.
Yeah, the Bookseller. I mean, the Bookseller, of course, is 160 years old this year. First started by the Whittaker family. Whittaker family sold it to what was then called VNU, which then later became Nielsen, the big market research company. And they ran it until 2010, spring 2010. But they had announced in 2009 that they wanted to get out of media and concentrate wholly on research. They were 95% a research company. So in the States, they had some very big B2B titles, Billboard probably being the most famous of them.
Yeah. What about Publishers Weekly? That's not connected
No,
with them.
Publishers Weekly wasn't connected with them. Publishers Weekly was part of Reed Exhibitions, but in a funny way, Reed had done exactly the same thing. They decided that they wanted to be an exhibitions first company, so they wanted to get out of most of their media operations. So actually, George, who runs and owns Publishers Weekly, and I did a management buyout almost within a few weeks of each other. There was some weird serendipity thing going on.
So you'd worked for Nielsen?
I'd run it. I'd started running the Bookseller. I had this fantastic job title, which was Managing Director Literary Division, and I ran the Bookseller in the UK and Kirkus Reviews in the States. So I was running it, and I did a management buyout when Nielsen wanted to get out of media. They didn't want to get out of the book business. They still have a very strong book data and book scan business called Nielsen Book, but specifically media they wanted out of.
Okay.
So it made for a very easy, seamless transition. Kind of
you and your bankers, I guess.
Something like that, yeah. So it meant that it worked kind of really well for everyone, because all the folk working here, kind of nothing changed. And in fact, we stayed in Nielsen's offices for 18 months or something like that. So literally, the day after, nothing changed except the kind of the name above the door.
So why did the Whittakers, you say?
Yeah, the Whittakers were the original Victorian family. So
why did they found it in the first place? What need were they filling?
Well, they were. I forget the exact title of the Bookseller, or the subtitle of the Bookseller at the time. I can dig it out. I've got it here somewhere. But it was to provide news and, to a certain extent, reviews of books that were coming out and important, they probably said, happenings within the book trade. It wasn't, the name always causes confusion. It wasn't specifically for what we would now call bookshops, partly because there was less of a divide between booksellers and publishers there. They were doing the same thing.
Yeah.
So it was an information source to tell the trade about new books that were coming out.
So it would, in other words, it would help inform the booksellers so that they could then inform their customers.
That's it. And of course, just as it does today, it informed publishers about what their rivals were up to, which they wouldn't necessarily know about. So
things like?
Well, I mean, there's a classic case of, I don't know, whoever you are, if you've just been the publisher of George Eliot's Mill on the Floss, then, you don't want to know that Charles Dickens, I don't even know whether I've got those dates right, but let's pretend I have. Okay. You don't want to know that Charles Dickens has got a book coming out on the same day, do you? So, what's the modern equivalent to that? You know, it's something like I don't know, Lee Child, you know, and I don't know, James Patterson, or Lee Child and J.K. or something, not having a book coming out on the exact same Thursday. So
coordination then.
Coordination, yeah. I mean, there are a lot fewer books then coming out now, less of an issue. But yeah, I mean, and it was the first time that had happened. So it was more of a kind of a quasi catalogue than what we would think of now as a magazine. And as Whitaker's developed the business, they increasingly sort of moved up. Probably, I would say, I'd have to look back in the archives, but probably as the sort of the 50s and 60s progressed, you know, there became a greater divide between the data side of things and...
Which means what?
So this is things like all of the details behind a book, you know, when it's coming out, who the author is, all of that metadata, what we would now say is metadata.
Okay.
So, because there were so many books coming out, you couldn't put them all in the same place. So I remember when I was working in a bookshop in southeast England in my teens, these giant books that Whitaker used to produce, which were, I think, called books in print. I'm not sure what their frequency was, whether they were annual or whatever. But these were huge clumping things. These were thousands of pages that you waded through, you know, to find out the name of the book that the customer had just asked you about. You couldn't put all of that lot in a magazine in the way you could in the 1850s.
People from the magazine would solicit information from all of the various publishers and put it together and then send it out once a month.
Yeah, I mean, initially, it's mainly been weekly across the years, but I suspect when it first came out, it probably was monthly. Let's have a look. Oh, here we go. Designed to be a handbook of British and foreign literature. Doesn't that sound grand? A reviewing and bibliographic journal. Diddly-bom. Not immediately obvious whether it was...
Yeah, okay. It came out regularly, though.
Yeah,
so
and it's been published regularly ever since. It's never dropped the ball, even during the war, Second World War. The booksellers' offices were bombed. The issue came out.
Yeah, it's that what is it?
Paternoster
Square. Yeah, there were millions of books that were destroyed.
That's right. And there were a lot of publishers in that area. Yeah, it was the Blitz. Yeah. 29th of December 1940. Yeah, and the bookseller. And the tall building of J. Whitaker and the Bookseller at 12 Warwick Lane, along with all the paper's records. But the Bookseller appeared on schedule on 2nd of January 1941. It showed, in Geoffrey Faber's phrase, not a hair out of place. Doesn't that sound fantastic?
Okay, so booksellers subscribe to it, publishers subscribe to it.
Agents.
Bibliophiles, I guess.
Bibliophiles, yeah, there are no.
Agents.
Agents.
There weren't that many back then. There was lots, right?
Yeah. Back then, I would say it was probably... Publishers would probably have been the single largest constituent, I would have thought. I mean, the book-selling market would have been, of course, very different, you know, and probably a lot around Charing Cross Road. But you know, it would always have been more about the publishers.
So the readers today, then, same idea?
Kind of the same. You know, what would be the different things now? You'd have many different types of reader within a publishing firm. You know, whether it's the new stuff like the digital guys. You know, was marketing a function back in the 1850s? I kind of doubt it. You got bookshops, you got chain bookshops. Of course, you'd have supermarkets now. You know, so you know, all the buyers in a Tesco or an Asda or whatever would read the Bookseller. Not an issue at all back then. You've got the literary agents, more of them, as you point out. You've got bookshops, you've got publishers, you've got agents. Libraries, the public library market, which has been under massive, relentless cost-cutting pressure over here, which I know in the States it is regarded, I think, with a degree more civic pride. I don't know what the situation is in Canada, but you know, it is not necessarily that local authorities do not want libraries there, but they are under such cost pressures that they have to find things to give. And it's a very sorry situation.
It is, because libraries are much more than just lending books. You know.
They are completely, and time after time, this issue is raised within Parliament, and there are very well-known lobbyists as writers who can point to their own experience. As what person can't point to their own experience, even if it's just going along to a kids' reading thing.
Do you take an editorial position on this?
Yeah, we do. We even run a Facebook channel called Fight for Libraries. No, we take a very strong view of it. We regard libraries as an essential part of a civilised society, so we back it to the hilt. We think the cuts are entirely wrong.
So you're really speaking out on behalf of your constituency too, right?
Yes. Yeah. It is on behalf of constituency, of course it is, but actually it is more of a civic thing, because if people don't have that connection with books across all walks of life, the last thing you want is somehow for books to become kind of for the favoured few. They've got to be for everybody. Yeah. And it's tougher. Pressure on household budgets are tougher. So if you then undermine all of that by cutting back on the libraries as well...
So who's responsible for cutting it?
Well, it's a central government issue. It is the overall amount of money that goes from central to local government gradually gets squeezed. The demands on local authorities get ever increased, so something has to give. So the local authorities, councils, have to make decisions about how they're going to spend their money. There is a statutory responsibility to provide a full library provision, but there's been some slipperiness about what a full provision might mean. So cuts have come. Yeah. And what's happened is that some of the smaller libraries have closed, some small libraries have been turned into volunteer-run libraries. And you have to commend the volunteers for putting their time in, but it shouldn't be run by volunteers. It should. One sees it in so many parts of society, but our beef is with the libraries part of it, the book-related part of it. Others can beef about other bits.
The fact that your readership is both booksellers and book publishers, does that make it difficult to speak out on behalf of either one of them?
Difficult's probably too strong. I think we're always very aware that we have a number of constituencies, we have a kind of number of stakeholders, and we have to be aware of the fact that for large chunks of the time, their interests are the same. But for other times, yes, it isn't. There are problems, if there is a massive discounting over here and indie bookshops over here don't want any discounting.
There's only one chain though now, right?
There's only one major chain, Waterstones. Yeah. That also has tensions. We, like everybody else in the trade, breed a massive sense of relief. First, when Alexander Mahmood bought the Waterstones chain, when it was looking very vulnerable, which I can't even remember, maybe... What was that? 7 years ago?
Yeah, 2011, yeah.
Oh, I got that right. I don't normally get my dates right. Yeah, and now, of course, it has... Alexander wanted to sell out, and Waterstones has now been sold. It is a massively important thing. Sometimes some of the indies would deem Waterstones to be in competition with them, and I completely get that. If it's too close or if it's in the same town, it is very hard for an indie. It's not impossible. You take a town like Bath, which of course is a well-to-do area. You have Mr. B's, Emporium of Books, fantastic indie. You have Toppings, a small chain there.
Lovely
you have Waterstones. You got it all. It is of sufficient size to be able to accommodate them all. I think the position we would take on Waterstones is, let's look at the readers, the purchasers. That's a lot of people buying books from Waterstones. That's a good thing. And if Waterstones is not on the high street, then book selling becomes pretty invisible on most high streets. That has a knock-on effect for indies. It may be slightly further down the line, compared to the pressures if you've got a Waterstones 5 miles away, but ultimately it is to the greater good to have Waterstones sitting there. And they're great shops as well.
They've really turned themselves around too.
Yeah. Funnily enough, I was looking back at some of the old history of the Bookseller and our coverage, and I spotted somewhere a picture of the opening of the first Waterstones in 1982. And Tim Waterson actually has got he's got his memoirs coming out in
does he?
early next year. I think it's in February. I
Didn't
think it's
know that.
Atlantic Publishing. So if Tim's listening, I want an invite to the launch party. So,
That's great. Yeah, it's interesting. Toby Faber's apparently finishing off, as you would know, a history of Faber.
Yeah. Oh, well, that'll be fascinating.
Yeah.
And of course, they've just had a fantastic triumph at the Booker. So,
We touched on the fact that there's a monopoly, really, with Waterston.
Well, no, I think monopoly is actually completely the wrong. One is much closer to a monopoly if you look at our friends from Seattle, because the pressures on the high street are massively increased for indies and for Waterstones, not because of Waterstones, it's not remotely a monopoly, but by the pressures from Amazon, which of course has a massive percentage of the ebook market. But
isn't Waterstones selling Kindle?
No, it did not originally. Then there was a deal done, but then very publicly it exited from that arrangement. That feels like about 3 years ago, possibly even more. So definitely not. And I think over the last couple of years, certainly, as publishers and bookshops have seen where ebooks fit into the overall market.
Yeah, it seems to be levelling off.
It has levelled off, and that levelling off was a good 2 years ago.
Okay.
So you've got a combination of that. So the uncertainty slightly disappears, and as soon as you can take some uncertainty, I mean, there's lots of uncertainty. We've got it over here with Brexit. Talk about uncertainty, but in that instance, in that context, some uncertainty was removed. People find it easier to plan if there's less uncertainty. But what you had at the same time was, I think, a renewed sense of self-confidence amongst bookshops and publishers in printed books. And I think publishers have done a great job of increasing or improving the production values of books. I think if you looked now or a couple of years ago compared to 10, 15 years ago, production values, design values are massively improved. And at the same time, you've got bookshops feeling more confident about their place, feeling more confident, both parties feeling more confident that actually, the world's not going to change. It's not all going to be ebooks. Actually, people like print books, and to sort of not feel somehow, we're a bit dinosaur-like. No, it's a thing that people want. If people want it, they'll come and buy it, sell it to them. Ice cream's old-fashioned. I don't see anyone not wanting to have ice cream. I don't know why I came up with ice cream.
That's good, though, yeah.
Okay,
Who doesn't
ice
like
cream and
ice
an
cream?
allergy. Okay.
It's funny, I just interviewed, she's an essayist over when I was in Vermont just a couple of weeks ago, Anne Fadiman, and I think one of her short stories is called Ice Cream.
Oh, well.
And
Zeitgeist.
what are some of the pressing issues, then, that are facing booksellers and book publishers? We've talked about the obvious competition from Amazon. What else is hot?
With bookshops in particular, it is the high street itself, and that is a two-pronged problem. I'll probably now come up with 3 prongs, but let's say it's 2. You've got the cost of being in the high street and what we over here call business rates, and business rates are incredibly high. And there's an unfairness there because business rates for an out-of-town warehouse, whether it's Amazon or anyone else's warehouse, are relatively minuscule. So you have a disparity there. It is much more expensive to trade on the high street, and that's not just the physical kind of cost of your rent, and you've got to put shelves up and make it look nice, and people want to come in, and staffing and so on.
Yep.
But it is the rates that the council charges. Councils are under pressure because the high street generally is under attack, so they're getting less income. This is another squeeze that indirectly then affects the libraries that we talked about earlier. But at the moment in the high street, you've got shops going out of business. Only this morning it's announced that Debenhams, one of our big chain stores, doesn't sell any books, thank goodness, likely to cut, I think it's something like 20 branches. We've had a House of Fraser, iconic high street brands going. And the kind of the casual dining bit of the market, which I think is the technical term, Jamie Oliver's, branches, that sort of thing. There have been loads of cuts there. So you've got the high street has to work so much harder to be an attractive destination. There are certain towns where it's just not. So then you have a footfall issue. So that's a pressure on shops. So you've got an unfairness thing and you've got a pressure thing. Now, that, of course, then impacts on publishers. And there's been a sea change over the last few years. Publishers' responsiveness to the needs of the high street bookseller, whether that's an indie shop or whether that's Waterstones or whether it's Blackwell's. Blackwell's having a great time at the moment.
They're more than, how many outlets do they have?
Oh gosh, I'm going to get phoned up afterwards. I think it's about 30.
Versus about 300 for...
Yeah, I mean it's a different kettle of fish because Blackwell's still is very strong in the campus bookshop market, but if you take their flagship store in Broad Street, or Broad as they call it in Oxford, that is a general store as well as being an academic shop. But they're doing fantastically well, and they're doing fantastically well, incidentally, at online sales as well as physical sales, and I get the sense that there is a willingness for people to go to their preferred bookseller in physical terms for their online purchasing as well, if that particular seller does a good job. And that's not all about price. And all parties have got much better about integrating their loyalty cards and those sorts of things. Waterston's has just upgraded theirs, but lots of the indies do this stuff extremely well as well. One I mentioned earlier in Bath, Mr. B's. I mean, it's got a great scheme. It's got I'm probably using the wrong term. They'd shout at me for it, but a sort of subscription type model.
Yeah, kind of a loyalty.
Well,
thing.
More than that, it's them putting their experience and know-how and enthusiasm to play and saying, well, we will choose books for you. So it is that sort of book club there. So
we will recommend books for you.
Everyone does it slightly differently,
right.
But I mean there is something of a sea change, I think, in terms of how well physical retailers can do at selling books online. And we have a thing here in the UK, maybe it's the same term throughout the world, the whole click and collect thing. So you can do your online order, but you pick it up in store. That's a great benefit because then you've always got a chance, or the bookseller's got a chance, that then you're going to make a secondary purchase when you're in there. But the pressures are, there, but the pressures, I would say, are mostly coming from the general high street situation. I think indie bookshops, and we've had some new. The trend of closures is, if not reversed, but certainly plateaued. There's some new shops coming out. I think it's either this weekend or on next weekend. There's a new one down in Bristol. Story Smith, if I've got that name right. So that it's an upbeat thing, but in the context of a tough high street. Anything that affects physical retailers affects publishers. So,
just in terms of improving their online presence or sales, anything else that they're doing that's improving that, other than the fact that there's this connection between the purchaser wanting to support the fact that this retailer is a presence in their community and adding a cultural destination and that kind of thing?
I think it is a general thing, but I think broadly they are playing to their strengths, that it's not all about an algorithm.
Right.
And of course, if you've got a big site, you've got a Waterston's or a Blackwell's, of course, there's automated technology behind it that's going to put a kind of, well, if you're about to buy this book, you might want to have a look at that book. But it is coming from a full-on bookseller, someone with experience. And I think there are design issues. I suspect if you looked at the Blackwell site now compared to the Blackwell site 6 or 7 years ago, you would be greatly impressed with the changes that have been made. So I don't think there's anything that is particularly specific about what they've done. I think they're just working it a bit more.
Okay. And just what about the Amazon tax situation? They were headquartered in Luxembourg.
Yeah.
Is that still? Is it
all of the with Brexit going, who the hell knows? But But generally, the pressures. Let me put it slightly differently. In the UK, the associations, in this case particularly the Booksellers Association, has kept up the pressure on via the EU. Yeah, and something like this, it is best served within an EU context. One country can't do anything very specifically. Is to say that in the UK terms, the rates, the business rates thing that is wrong, and in tax terms, overall tax, corporation tax, we would call it over here, that it is unfair for large global corporations to shift their money around and not seem to pay a fair share anywhere. That's not particularly an Amazon thing uniquely. It's true of all global corporations, and everywhere across the world, all national governments are struggling with, well, how can we do this? Partly because a lot of these companies are bigger than a lot of countries. So those are still very, very live issues.
Yeah.
There's an interesting one that's just going through now. There's been an EU directive that countries within the EU, if they so wish, can normalise the VAT rates, the value-added tax rates, between print and digital books and magazines. So we've had the situation in the UK where print books are zero rated for VAT, but digital books, e-books, and in fact any digital offering, digital magazine, the Bookseller, for instance, has to have a 20% VAT added. So you've got some price.
So again, that favours the printed product then.
Well, I don't think that does. It favours the printed product, but it makes for confusion in the market. Why am I spending? Why does this cost more? Why am I getting tax added? It's the same thing, isn't it? One's print, one's digital. Why is it different? And we have it on. Well, all B2B magazines, presumably consumer magazines as well. If you're selling a digital edition of it, you have to apply VAT. Well, the person's buying the digital edition because of the convenience of it. It's not a price point issue, it's a convenience issue if they're out on the road, and this is what all the national newspapers have done with the Times and so on. So having this different pricing structure because of a centrally applied tax is anomalous. So it will make it a lot simpler to sell, it's a lot simpler to market. In e-book terms, prices may come down, and that might create another little blip. And we've now seen this is not a print versus e, these things work in tandem. So if there's a little bit of a price advantage, a price reduction coming out of e-books, that wouldn't be a bad thing. But we'll see how it plays out. Hasn't happened yet, but the directive has gone out, and the Publishers Association are lobbying hard that the UK government should adopt this and get to zero. Fundamentally, it is a tax on reading. So that is what both the book side, the Publishers Association, and the magazine side, the Professional Publishers Association, are both lobbying hard to get to zero rating on VAT on books and magazines. So there's actually quite a lot of legislative type stuff going on at the moment.
Any other hot topics or issues that you think will rumble through the next number of years?
I don't think necessarily one single huge thing, but I think there are lots of smaller things where no one quite knows how things will play out. It's almost boring now, but the biggest thing, of course, for us is Brexit, and how that will impact. There would appear to be already an effect on the cost structure as the pound changes value in relation to the euro, where you are getting books printed in Italy primarily.
Is that where most of the British books are printed?
Well, you got if you're talking about colour books, then you're still talking about the Chinese market probably being the single bigger one. Probably at the upper end, maybe middle and upper end, Italy has always been a really strong colour printer.
Well, Czech Republic. That's
now you got me.
Because that's where Paul Hamlin went, and that was a big revolution with the colour and colour books.
Now your history knowledge is a lot better than mine on that. So I don't know on the Czech market. Yeah. I don't particularly think of it, but maybe it has been superseded by the Chinese market.
Yeah, that sounds about
this
right.
is colour stuff, of course. In black and white terms, you need local prints. You need the UK.
Why is that?
Fast turnaround. You need to get the books done quickly.
The books typically take. That's the thing about books. They take a long time. It
Not
takes
so much.
about a year.
No. Not so, well, maybe from announcement through to print. But I mean, if you take now the Booker winner, Milkman, Faber, up the print run, probably that night,
Yes.
and up again and up again. It's certainly six figures now, 100,000 plus. That it has gone up by. Those books are being done. That will. I'm not sure which of the printers, it'll be Clay's or CPI, I think, and those books are getting out there now. So actually those turnaround times have really come down. And it's probably been a problem for the printers because the bookshops are taking less upfront orders, or they're reducing those upfront order numbers. So they're not as pile-em high. And of course you had chains like Borders, which were a big pile-em high, of course that disappears out of the market. So there's been a change in the ordering process from the book selling side. Printers have adapted to having shorter run, more frequent runs, rather than, well, let's bash out 100,000 right from day one and potentially end up pulping them. So that's become a much more of a management issue for book printers. But that's what everyone's used to now. And most of the time, you don't have those kind of supply chain issues. That sounds a grotty term in terms of the book trade, but supply chain issues where suddenly there's a buzz and there aren't the books in the shops to be able to meet it. So some of that, of course, can be replaced with print-on-demand stuff, and people like Ingram have made massive steps forward on that. But that doesn't particularly affect the mainstream book market. Certainly doesn't affect, obviously, the big colour, the hardback stuff, but yeah, I mean, a straightforward Faber and Faber paperback is going through regular channels, book printers, but those book printers have got a lot faster at dealing with turnaround.
And they still they're still able to maintain a high standard of quality too.
Yeah, and as we were saying earlier, I think that standard has improved markedly compared to a decade ago. So that's all good. So I forget what we were talking about. I think we were talking about issues that that was it's part of the Brexit thing that affects the pricing model, and an area that is certainly. Philip, our editor, would be much stronger on than I would, but the whole issues around territoriality and rights within different territories, sales of physical books within those territories, is a complex issue, and I'm not equipped to talk about it very coherently, but is certainly bubbling under. And the Australian market is a very interesting one because it's got those sorts of issues to deal with, but it has got Amazon. Amazon had been there via the book depository before, but is there now physically more. So that international dimension of it all, and you've got publishers with different strategies. HarperCollins' global strategy would be different to, say, PRH's or Hachette's in our UK market. So I think that all gets very interesting. Then you have localized issues, and this year with 50 years of the Booker, started in '68, I was reading about the launch of it then, which has come under a lot of scrutiny because obviously 50 years is something that everyone's going to pick up on, and I'm sure they've put out a lot of interesting stuff on it. But it then focuses attention. Now, there'll have been some stuff in that debate that I'm sure the Booker folk wouldn't, or Man Booker, sorry, my apologies, wouldn't have wanted to.
Don't want to forget the sponsor.
No. And what a great sponsor they have been. But so you want the coverage, but it then focuses on the books. I actually think fundamentally it's a good thing. The debate rages. Should American books been allowed in? Should they not have been allowed in? Was this
Definitely
been the
not.
year? You're definitely not. Okay, so you're a Canadian. I think the good thing about it is that it is focused attention back on books.
Controversy, it's
Yeah,
buzz.
and if it was in a sense a regular year of the Booker and there hadn't been the issues, would the winner have attracted quite so much attention, I'm not sure it would. So I think I think a little bit of controversy has been fantastically good for the Booker this year. Where it goes with that debate in forthcoming years, I don't know. But thank God it's there for Booker Group initially in '68 and the Mang Group since. It's a vitally important part of what we were doing. I had the great experience. You sit down, you don't know who you're going to be sat next to. And I was sat next to a lady who is a specialist bookbinder. And I don't mean the kind of like, we've got, bound editions of the Bookseller here, not everyday stuff like this, but real hardcore, one-off
That's
works of art.
That's the kind of people that I go after, and I want to talk to them. Art of the book.
Yeah. I mean, so each of the shortlisted books have a special edition.
She's the one that did them.
She did one. They get 6
Yeah.
specialist bookbinders there, and I went onto her site and had a look. I think the lady's name is Kate Hunt. I'm going to now check that on my phone. But that was fascinating. I knew, but I'd forgotten that they did that, and I think it's a really, really nice touch.
Well, I love the fact that they're tying it into the, as I say, the book arts, and the fact that there's all sorts of wonderful tradition involved in bookmaking.
Yeah. No, it wasn't Kate Hunt, so I'm now going to have to figure out what the name was. Oh dear, how embarrassing.
I was going to ask you about, just in winding up, your conferences. Are they and also just business in general? Is it booming? Is it compared to 10 years ago? Is it where are you?
No, it's reduced compared to 10 years ago, sadly, because the Bookseller has always been in this fantastically isolated position. The book trade goes through this massive disruption, i.e. the trade that we serve. But the media business has also gone through a massive change, and we're a media business. So, let's have 2 waves hitting us. Why not? So we've had to work blooming hard to sort of keep going and to prosper.
Who are your big advertisers?
The main publishers.
They're promoting their books?
Yeah. And, so I think the front cover of the issue that will be coming into the office in a couple of hours, I think, is probably going to be HarperCollins. I think it's the new David Walliams book, children's book coming out. Fantastic supporters of the Bookseller. It is the big publishers, big and medium publishers. Those are our biggest customers.
What about Waterson's? Do they advertise?
Waterson's don't advertise. There'd be no reason for Waterson's to advertise. They're subscribers of ours. We know my local store in southwest of London, in a town called Guildford. I was chatting to the manager there, and I know how she uses the Bookseller, and I really love knowing that. It's a nice shop. If you're ever in Guildford, go there.
Well, that's the neat thing is too. They're not all cookie cutter. They're crafted to serve each different market.
Absolutely right.
Which is great.
Yeah. And you have to,
Waterson's
in Guildford is very different to Waterson's in North London.
And that explains their success.
Yeah. Yeah, so customers across the board. It's the publishers, it's the bookshops, the bookshop chains. Not necessarily for advertising, but for subscribing. The conferences are primarily going to be the publishers, and we do 3 conferences. We do Future Book, which, as it sounds, is future leaning. It's not just digital books. It's different ways of approaching the book business and helping it to prosper. And kind of underneath everything we do at the Bookseller, fundamentally, it's about how can we help get more books in the hands of more readers, and that's what our customers do, be they publishers or bookshops or libraries. So anything we do, we try and add value to that proposition, whether that through analysis, through celebration, through whatever. So the conference is a big deal for us. We had our children's conference just a couple of weeks ago. That was a great success, very buzzy. We'll have Future Book at the end of November. Always, I think it's something like Europe's biggest conference outside of the kind of the big trade fairs. And our biggest deal comes in May of each year when we run the British Book Awards, which has both the kind of what we would call the trade categories, so Indie Bookshop of the Year, Publisher of the Year, but also the Books of the Year. And we introduced Author of the Year and Illustrator of the Year. So Illustrator of the Year was something new that we did this year. Mm-hmm. Axel Scheffler was the inaugural winner.
Now you need Book Designer of the Year.
Well, the problem is every time we do anything, someone pops up and says, well, we need this and we need that. And I'm thinking, well, we'll be going on till 3 a.m. soon. So that's a very important part of our business, but also one where we feel very privileged that we've been trusted by the trade to represent it.
How can listeners subscribe?
Well, just straight go to thebookseller.com, and we operate on a freemium model, the classic freemium model. So there's a certain amount that you can read on the website for free. Once you reach a certain point, then we'll say, it'd be nice if you could give us some money, and it's just click on the appropriate links at that point.
So what, you get 5 or 6 articles a month, kind of?
I think you get 3 before we ask you to register, so you can just turn up and look, and we don't even need an email from you. 3 in, I think, and then I think another half dozen or something like that, and then we'll ask you to pay. There's certain things that no one except subscribers can get. You can't get the hardcore analysis, you can't get the charts, you can't get the data, you can't get book previews, because what we do is we preview each week in print, and that then goes online. Each week is different, so fiction previews for 3-4 months ahead, children's books coming out in 3-4 months' time in the following week, non-fiction and paperback. So none of the hardcore stuff is available unless you subscribe. But a certain amount of the news is available, because we want people to know about it, and there's a lot of stuff that we want to amplify messages out there. So, for instance, World Book Day, big thing in the UK. A fantastic thing, we actually hosted the launch of which books are going to be the World Book Day titles in March of next year, live from the office here on a Facebook Live thing with the World Book Day team. That's great. So, of course, you don't want to limit that. You want to push that out to as many people as are going to hear it and see it.
Yeah. Do you more or less cover the UK and Publishers Weekly covers the US, or?
Well, both of us would cover international markets, but coming from a home base.
Okay.
So there's plenty of stuff that we do on the Australian market, the Irish market, and so on. And of course, when it comes round to the international book fairs, so it was just recently Frankfurt, so we're full on international, and we produce a daily newspaper for the Frankfurt Book Fair, just as we produce a daily for London Book Fair and for Bologna Children's Book Fair, and indeed for Beijing Book Fair. So,
and they would do Book Expo?
Yeah. PW will do Book Expo primarily, although they're in London and they're in Frankfurt as well. We reach a certain amount of commonality, but we're coming at it from our kind of home bases, as it were.
Yeah.
And of course,
sounds like you need both if you want to get the whole world.
There's no way you could just rely on us for anything about America and vice versa. With PW about the UK. It's a big old sector. Not least by the number of, if you regard a book as a product, which I don't, but how else do you describe it? The number of new products every year. I mean, it's colossal. So
what is it? Do you know?
Well, in the UK, we always reckon about 150,000, but God knows. Frankly, with the amount of self-published, haven't got a clue. I think it's supposed to be about 150,000 if you count books that have got ISBNs on them.
Good.
And how's the Canadian market? Let me ask you.
Well, it's I guess the big thing there is that Penguin Random House is kind of colossal, and then there's HarperCollins and much smaller Simon and Schuster, and then a bunch of independents. So I know a lot of authors are kind of uptight about that setup.
Yeah.
But other than that, I guess you'd know in terms of any Canadian author that sort of busts through on the international scene.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think Canada is certainly trying to work to push its authors, its books internationally.
Yeah, they've got Frankfurt in 2020.
That's right.
Yeah.
And the Kundil History Prize has been very visible over here this year. I went to a reception at Canada House for that. So I think Canada certainly seems, maybe I hadn't noticed it before, but it seems to have a bit more of an export head-on at the moment. So
yeah, I think you're right. Yeah, well, it's all around that Frankfurt that's building up to that. I think.
Yeah.
But, well, thank you.
My pleasure. It's been good fun.
To have met you and got a bit more insight into what you're doing and our ever never-ending quest to understand and learn about the book.
Yeah.
Thanks again.
Pleasure.
Nigel, I should say your name is Nigel Roby, and you are the owner
And chief exec of the Bookseller.
very good, in London, overlooking the Houses of Parliament.
Looking down over the Thames. I had a scary phone call from the landlord yesterday. I thought he was going to say, the lease is coming to an early end, but in fact he wanted to extend it. Yeah, we have a nice view, and on a sunny day in London, which is something of a rarity, it's a great view from here. So.
Thanks again.
Pleasure.